Hi, it's Marc Summers, and today we're going to be talking to Jessica Nabongo. We will be discussing finding unity through world traveling.
In nearly, I would say not nearly every,
The importance of curiosity and openness, no matter where you are in the world.
was picking up, and my audience was growing, and people were telling me, oh my God.
And being resilient through grief.
So I chose to just keep on trying to figure it out and do what I want. And, I quit things a lot in a quest to figure out what it is that I want to do.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to Marc Summers Unwraps.
How many times do you think you've said, "Hi, my name is Marc Summers"?
I always say, hi, my name is Marc Summers, because I never assume anybody knows who I am. And this happened to me the other day at the baseball thing. A guy came over and said, hi, my name is whatever it was at the time. And I said, hi, Marc Summers. He goes, I know who you are. And I go, oh, well, that's nice. But I just don't ever assume that people know who I am, The other thing about my name that's just funny is the kids who grew up with me, who are adults now, always refer to me as Marc Summers. It's not Mark or Mr. Summers. It's MarcSummers. I'm Marc Summers. And that just cracks me up.
Yeah.
They always call me by the full name.
Marc Summers.
Yeah.
Marc Summers. Does anyone call you Mark?
No, I'm always Marc Summers. So it makes, and it's the funniest thing to be, Harvey, our announcer to this day, still calls me Mr. Summers. He never calls me Mark. He always calls me Mr. Summers. Here we are, 30 plus years past that, and Harvey calls me Mr. Summers. It just cracks me up. I am so excited for my guest today, and I'm going to tell you why. We're meeting for the first time in person. We have spoken on the phone, met through my adopted sister, Mary Dudley, who initially was my assistant in Orlando when I was doing the Nickelodeon stuff. And she said, I met this really interesting woman in my building. You should call her. And I did the research. We got on the phone. And Jessica, what a life you have.
Oh, thank you.
It's fantastic. It's amazing. So, here's the research here, which I find lovely. St. John's degree in English Lit. Now, what are developmental studies? You went to the London School of Economics. What does that mean?
Yeah, so development studies in the UK, it's the same as international development in the US. So like economic and political history of the world, essentially.
And then you got a job at the UN?
Yeah.
Doing what?
So before I went to the UN, I was working in rural Benin for an NGO. And then I went to the UN and I was working at the Food and Agriculture Organization. So the focus of my degree at LSE was agriculture, like foreign direct investment in agriculture in Africa. And so I was working in comms and partnerships at the UN in Rome.
How long did you do that?
Like 3 years.
Was it a fun job?
I learned a lot.
That would be a no.
I wouldn't call it fun necessarily, but I learned a lot.
That
so
must
it
have
was
been
worthwhile.
fantastic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's step back here a little bit. Your parents are from Uganda,
Mm-hmm.
and you were born in the States, however.
Yes,
Okay.
I was born in Detroit.
And so tell me about being brought up by your parents and their influences on you.
Mm-hmm.
Education obviously was a priority, but what did your mom and dad do?
So my father was an analytical chemist, and my mother a registered nurse. Yeah. So my father actually came to the U.S. like in the 1950s through a scholarship program. So that's like pre-independence. Him and Barack Obama's dad did the same scholarship program because it was for East Africans. And so he went to Western Michigan, then went back to Uganda and was teaching. And then him and my mom came in 1969 and they permanently settled. So yeah, that's
69, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like in Detroit at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Your parents obviously had all this education and worldly experiences, but Detroit was always a strange place to me in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what that was like growing up in that world.
Well, what's interesting about Detroit, and I think what people never talk about, is the city is quite economically segregated. But it's not like it's just one big poor city. That's not what Detroit is at all. For a long time, it had the richest Black Americans in the country.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, because of the auto industry and a bunch of other things. But I grew up in like an upper middle class neighborhood. It was in the city, but it felt very suburban. So people from certain parts of Detroit would be like, you're from the suburbs. And I'm like, no, I have a 482 zip code, which means I'm from the city. But they consider like those pockets to be more suburban. And a lot of the people who grew up there often went to private schools in the suburbs. So I went to private schools from preschool to 6th grade. Then I went to like a magnet school in the city. And both my middle school and high school were Detroit public schools, but they were blue ribbon. So you had to test to get into both of those schools. So there's absolutely amazing education within the Detroit public school system. But yeah, I always feel like when people talk about Detroit, they never show the full picture.
Right.
And that full picture is that there are a lot of people in the city who are highly educated, who have children, who are highly educated and incredibly successful.
Yeah. My mom was from Toledo, Ohio, so we used to go to Detroit for a good time, you know. And it was a cool city, you know, in so many different ways. So tell me who Cassie
Depecol?
Tell me who that person is, yes.
So Cassie Depecol is an American woman who I read about in February 2017. And she made headlines because she got the Guinness record for visiting every country in the world the fastest. And at the time, she claimed she was the first woman, but that wasn't true. But still, what she did was absolutely amazing. She visited 193 countries in 18 and a half months, which still boggles my mind.
Insane.
Yeah, it's that, you know, that's just something different. But it's interesting because when I read her story, I was like, wait, people care? I'd always wanted to visit every country in the world since my early 20s.
Really?
Yeah. Like, even on my blog, if you scroll back on my blog, I talk about it. But I thought I would do it by the time I was 40 or 50. So once I found out about her, I found myself in an internet rabbit hole, as one does. And I learned about the country counting community. And so I started,
exists?
It exists.
Tell me about that.
It exists. It's mostly like Northern European men. But it's a whole community of people who are obsessed with getting to every country in the world. Then some people want to do like every populated territory, and there's all of these levels.
Oh my.
I'm not one of those people. There's a lot of weirdos.
And you're not one of those either.
I don't feel like I'm a weirdo on some level, but it's interesting because there's this whole community. And so at that time, so that's February 2017, at that time, only 150 people had been to every country in the world. And there was only one black person, a black man named Sihk Maturi, who's half Polish and half Kenyan. And so we finally met in Warsaw last year.
Did you really?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was so incredible. He's been to every country in the world twice, and he's very close to doing it 3 times, which I find absolutely absurd.
How old is this man?
I think he's like in his mid to late 50s.
So the question I have is, you decide to do this, okay? 2017. Okay.
Well, I gave myself the deadline of my 35th birthday in 2017, but I had wanted to do it before that.
I think the people listening are asking, how can you afford to do this?
I think that's the number one question I get. So at the time I was working for myself. I was running like a boutique luxury travel agency. And so I had some savings, I had some income, and then I had a ton of points. And like, I'm super loyal and I only use credit cards. So, you know, I was racking up points on everything. And then I had tons of miles from all the airlines. And so I made it work. And, you know, as my profile started to grow on Instagram, people would give me like free hotel stays and free tours.
They would just call you up and say, could you stay?
No. They didn't call me up. I called them up.
And said what?
I said, hi, you know, like I'm on a mission to visit every country in the world. I would love if you could host me for 3 nights. And in exchange, I'll post about it on my Instagram.
And they said yes?
Yeah.
And were you going to high-end places or?
Yeah, a mix.
I mean, were you calling the Marriott or were you calling the Four Seasons?
The Four Seasons. So I work with the Four Seasons a lot. I've been to a lot of their properties. But then, you know, it depends on the country as well, right? Like sometimes it's like whatever you can get. Right. Because that's the thing. When you're visiting every country in the world, not every country in the world has a tourism infrastructure. So sometimes it's like, I'm just happy to be at this 3-star hotel. But when it was possible, then of course I wanted to go to a really nice place because that also served as a real vacation versus like what the rest of it was. Sometimes it was tough. Like some countries were really, really tough.
And so, you know, I think what people have to realize is this is not necessarily a vacation.
No.
Tell me the mission.
Hardly.
And why you want to do this.
So honestly, for me, it morphed as I was going. So in the beginning, it was just for me. Like, I wanted to visit every country where I'm super curious. I grew up in a house with a globe, atlas, 2 sets of encyclopedias. By the time I graduated high school, I'd been to 8 countries. So like I was just traveling. When I decided to set that goal of my 35th birthday, that was in Bali. Indonesia was my 60th country. So like, I was already like very much in it. And so for me, it was driven by my curiosity. I'm just super curious. I wanted to see how people live all over the world. But then as it started going and press was picking up and my audience was growing and people were telling me, oh my God, like I'm so inspired. And I'm like, what? All I'm doing is getting on and off planes. What do you mean? I don't understand how you're inspired. Because I've always been someone who just goes for it.
But travel's about education as well.
It's about education for sure. And that's the thing for me. It's like even coupled with my background, so going to the London School of Economics, having that political and economic history of the world, working for the UN, having parents who are immigrants, and that all came together to make the experience incredibly rich for me. And I'm also a writer. So for me, it allowed me to sort of tell stories about places that many people have never heard of.
Yeah.
And places that most people have never been to. So that was so incredible because people would say, I've never heard of this country, or, oh my gosh, that's what North Korea really looks like, or that's what Saudi Arabia is really like. So it just turned into this thing where I've always wanted to be a teacher, but that doesn't support my lifestyle.
But you've become a teacher.
Yeah, exactly. And I've always wanted to do it. And so it really morphed into this thing where the journey became bigger than me. And I remember I was in Mali, which was country 154, and I was kind of down. I was really looking forward to going to Mali, and I wanted to go to this place, Jenne, but because of like guerrilla war, there was just a bunch going on. There was like some instability in the country, so I couldn't get to certain places that I wanted to go, and I was just frustrated, and I was exhausted, and I'd met this photographer. We went to the market and he was telling this group of guys about me and they're like, oh my God, c'est pas vrai, c'est incroyable. Like, it's not true. It's incredible. And I'm like, yeah. And then one of them said, c'est pas pour toi, c'est pour nous. It's not for you, it's for us. Talking about the journey. And honestly, like that lit a fire under me. Even though people had been reaching out and DMing and emailing, them saying that lit a fire under me. And it was like, okay, I want to quit right now. But because at that point, I still had 41 countries to go to.
You can't quit.
Right, exactly. And I was like, public failure? No, thank you. And so, but that really pushed me because I saw in that moment, like, yeah, this is so much bigger than me. And it means so much more to other people than it even means to me. And that's okay. Because it got to the point where I just feel like I'm a vessel. And not just for like Black people to see themselves, for women. I've been to 89 countries solo across 6 continents. But for everyone, I hope that what people get from my journey is not necessarily like go see every country in the world because it's expensive and exhausting.
Yep.
But I think it's about, showing people that you can dream a little bit bigger. And like, if you have a dream, go after it, That was my dream, but yours is something different.
How many languages do you speak?
So I would say French is my second language. I speak some Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian.
So what happens now with computers and phones and iPads? You can translate just about anything, and I imagine can interact with people globally.
Yeah, for sure. But I feel like if you speak French and Spanish and English, I feel like you can get around very easily around the entire world. I would like to learn Arabic. That if I had the time, I would love to do that. But you can always find someone who speaks English. So I always tell people, if you're struggling to find someone who speaks English, find someone who's like 12 to 15 years old.
Really?
Because those kids, they're learning English in school. And so their parents probably don't speak English. But if you find like a 12 to 15, even 10 years old sometimes, they'll be able to help you out.
So I have a boatload of questions here, and you just brought up 17 more. Let's start off with, you said you were in North Korea. Tell me about how did you get in and what was the experience like? And I have to preface all this by saying traveling for women is tough. Is being a Black woman even more difficult to travel in some of these countries?
It's so interesting. You know what? Like, I've only ever been a Black woman. So
yeah,
it's
I've never had that experience.
It's very difficult for me to compare. But like, because even the women thing, I think we just like, why is it tough? You know, like bad things can happen to you anywhere. Like as far as like sexual assault, most people are sexually assaulted by people they know. So in some way, maybe you're safer when you're away from home.
Could be.
You know? So for me, the biggest issues I have, I would say specifically, it's less about being a Black woman and more about being visibly African. Because
Explain that.
So to that end, a lot of people, the United States Border Patrol in particular, think that my American passport is fake.
Really?
Yes.
And they say that to you?
Oh my God. I've had so many issues with U.S. immigration. You can't even, some of them are in the book. I've had so many issues with U.S. immigration.
Where they try and stop you and say,
Not try to stop
they
me.
stop
I'm
you.
talking about secondary. I'm talking about all types of searches. It's happened
Oh, my.
multiple times.
Really?
Multiple times. Asking me for other forms of ID besides my passport to enter my home country. Yeah.
Do you have the whole global entry thing as well?
Now I have global entry. Yeah.
Wow. See, I had a hard time getting global entry because I had shot a show in Cuba and they said, you can't go to Cuba. And I said, yeah, you can. And they turned me down initially. And I wrote a letter to somebody and ended up getting it. But they're nuts at those places.
You know what's so crazy? That happened to a friend of mine. And
Really?
she texted me and she said, do you have global entry? I said, yeah. She said, how did you get it? I don't know. I filled out the thing. I think because mine had like 100, almost 200 countries.
But you have to do an interview. Didn't you have to do a face-to-face?
I did do an interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the list is so long. They weren't like thumbing through it because it's literally a list of like 195 countries.
Yeah.
So they were more fascinated by that, and that
Good.
probably distracted them from actually
Wow, I can't believe
asking
that,
any
though.
real questions.
Can't get into your own country. So tell me about North Korea.
So North Korea. So I also have a Ugandan passport. And so, because the U.S. government forbids Americans from going to North Korea.
Right.
North Korea doesn't care.
They don't?
No, they do not care. Because they knew I was American. My Ugandan passport says I was born in the U.S. And when I was going back to Beijing, I had to present my U.S. passport because that's how I was getting into China. So North Korea literally doesn't care. So I spent 6 days there. I worked with a company who like organizes all of it. So you just send them your information, you pay the money, and like they organize it. And so it's definitely like a North Korean government tour. So it's very prescriptive, but also we got to do other things. You're always with a North Korean.
I bet.
Yeah, for
Did you
sure.
feel they were looking at your emails and stuff
No.
like that? No.
Never. No. I didn't at all.
Are the people nice?
People were super nice. I mean, obviously they're a bit guarded.
Oh, yeah.
But there was one point during the tour where I decided not to go to a thing, and so somebody stayed back with me because there were 3 guides with our group. So a woman stayed back with me. She had like lived in Angola and lived a couple different places. So it was nice to connect with her. And, I wouldn't share the contents of our conversation because I think it's important to like protect people's privacy.
Sure.
But we had an open conversation, and
Did she have thoughts about Americans and?
no, they don't really care.
They
I think that there's a huge misconception. Like they're not obsessed or like super hateful towards Americans. They
See, this is what I love to hear. These are the stories.
Yeah, they kind of just live in their own little bubble. Now, obviously, the tour guides have a certain level of privilege versus other people in the country. But we walked around Pyongyang. If I spoke Korean, I could have definitely gotten to speak to more people. But like we met a group of college kids. They were super shy. I mean, North Koreans reminded me, I lived in Japan for a year, kind of similar in like the shyness in talking to strangers, in particular in English. But people, like I chatted, I took pictures with
I was
some
going to ask
local
you, can you
people.
take pictures anywhere?
You can. So the only place you can't take pictures are construction sites, and you can't take pictures of the military. That's it.
Construction sites?
Because the military works on the construction
okay.
sites. And so you can't take pictures there. That's it. Other than that, like, don't bring religious paraphernalia in. Don't bring porn in.
Yeah.
And that's it. And to me, I'm like, you should follow the rules wherever you go.
Of course.
You know what I mean? So North Korea is no different. It's just follow the rules and you're good.
How was the food?
It was all right. I mean, it's Korean.
Yeah.
So, like, if you like bibimbap and all that jazz, then it's fine.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, so it was just typical Korean food. The beer was, I thought, pretty good. And we went to a grocery store, and I got this amazing facial toner, which I'm like, will I ever get this again? Once I ran out. But yeah, the most interesting thing to me about North Korea was how normal it felt.
Really?
So we went to a museum, and there were kids that were there on a field trip. And driving, in the bus, you would see couples in the park holding hands. You saw people riding their bikes. Like in the grocery store, you saw people shopping for groceries. And so for me, that's what was interesting. It felt normal. Of course, there's oppression and suffering, but that's in every country in the world. I'm like, point out a single country in the world where there's no oppression and there's no suffering. Because people were criticizing me saying, well, you didn't go to labor camps. I'm like, I've never been to the projects in America or a prison in America. Why would I go to a labor camp in North Korea?
Yeah, good.
Why would they let me go to a labor camp in North Korea? Like, that's just wild.
Yeah.
No tourist would come to America and say, I want to go see your prison.
Yeah, let's go to Sing Sing. Right?
You know what I mean? Like, that's just not happening. So I just, for me, I'm always like, treat other countries the way you treat all countries.
Right.
Like, I hate when people go to African countries and they want to take pictures of African babies. I'm like, do you do that in Europe? Are you taking pictures of all the little European babies? No. So for me, I try to go into every country with the same mind that I go into every country.
What was the most difficult country to get into?
Syria.
Because?
Because when I was going, Americans were not allowed to enter. And they were not giving African passport holders visas because they were afraid they were overstaying to work. And I said, do I look like I want to overstay a visa in Syria? So that was the only country I was ever denied a visa. So what I ended up doing was I went to Golan Heights, which is an Israeli-occupied area of Syria. And it actually, was a little bit disappointing. But, before I went, I was disappointed because I had plans to go to Damascus and, But what was really interesting is I went with a Palestinian, a Jerusalem-born Palestinian guide, and we went, and I was really keen to, get a cultural experience of Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to this area, and I said, you got to help me. I want to talk to people. And so we start talking to people, and we met all of these older people who were there the day the 7-day war started, the day the fence went up. So there was an older woman who said, yeah, of course I remember that day. And she said in the beginning, all they had were megaphones to talk to their family across the fence. And when they would see movement and it looked like a funeral, they'd be like, who died? And that's how they would find out. And I met this guy who was working at an apple orchard. It was his grandfather's. He'd never seen his grandfather again after that day. And then the most heartbreaking story was there was a woman who was pregnant, and her husband had gone to see his family in a village. And then the war happened. He didn't meet his son until the son was 40. And they met in Jordan.
God. Oh, my God.
Yeah. So it's really, what's interesting is these are Syrian people, and all they want to do is be reunited with their country, but there's still the fence there. And so they can't. But it's really interesting. They still very much feel Syrian. They still speak Arabic. Some of their kids are starting to speak Hebrew. But in that area, everything is still in Arabic because it's occupied, but it's still Syria.
It's so crazy. I do these walking tours. I did a 70-mile through Tuscany and Umbria. I did a 60-mile through Portugal. And on the last trip in Portugal, we had a very wealthy sheikh from Saudi Arabia on this trip. Man was in great shape. He owned camel farms and he owned date farms, and he was fascinating. And there's only about 12 or 14 people who go on these things, and each night you sit and have dinner with somebody else. And so as a Jewish guy sitting across from this guy who was a sheikh from Saudi Arabia, I wanted to have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, is there any way ever that the Israelis and the Arabs can get together? And he said, never in a million years. He said, they don't even know what they're fighting about anymore. It's just been passed down from generation to generation. The hatred and the craziness, it's so depressing. And I always like to think that if you would take somebody from North Korea and just have a conversation with you, you guys would get along fabulous. But it's some crazy person running the government who dictates what we're allowed to say, do, like, dislike. It's kind of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now, you know. I don't know how that ever gets resolved. It seems to be getting worse instead of getting better. But you've experienced all these things in so many different ways. You know, once again, the fact that you don't have your own TV show on a regular basis, I mean, we've talked about this forever because your experiences are amazing. And just sit back and this is maybe the easiest interview I've ever done. I just want to sit and listen to these stories, you know? And so North Korea was difficult. Where's the most unusual
Well,
country?
North Korea, I wouldn't say was
No,
difficult. Syria.
Yeah, Syria, rather.
Yeah.
My bad.
Most unusual
Yes.
is Turkmenistan, hands down.
Tell me.
So Turkmenistan feels like what people think North Korea would feel like. That feeling of being watched, that feeling of like, this is bizarre. That is Turkmenistan. Because, like, for example, first of all, they have all sorts of Guinness World Records for crazy things. Like tallest flagpole, largest indoor Ferris wheel, the most buildings made of white marble. Like, literally, their dictator just spends the money to get these Guinness records. It's so wildly
Odd.
And so you're driving down these streets. Maybe it's like 6 to 8 lane roads, like, you know, 3 to 4 in each direction. And these huge buildings, everything is white. To drive a car in the capital, Ashgabat, you have to have a white car. If you go outside, your car has to be washed before it comes back in.
Come on.
And the thing is, you don't see people. And I kept saying, I'm like, where are the people? The hotel I was staying in, there were no people. Everywhere we went to go and eat, like, obviously I was with a guide. Everywhere we went to go eat, there were no people. And I'm like, what is going on? And so eventually I was like, I need to go to a market. I need to see actual
Humans.
signs of life.
Yes. And did they take you?
Yeah, they did. And so we ended up going to this market and, like, you know, it was cool, but obviously, like, I was the center of attention. Because, you know, it's one of the least visited countries in the world. So people were, like, taking pictures with me and just, like, staring at me and super fascinated. I was just happy to see people. And then the best part of it was the door of no, it's called the door to hell. And it's basically like a huge hole in the ground, hours outside of the capital, where gas has been burning off since I think the 70s. And it's so beautiful. One of the most stunning things I've ever seen. It's
Really?
basically a massive fire pit. And so you spend the night there, like you have a tent or whatever, but absolutely glorious, like under the stars, just really phenomenal. No light pollution at all. That's probably their biggest tourist site. But yeah, Turkmenistan was weird. Like, I definitely had the feeling that I was being watched.
When I go to different countries, the first thing I do is go to their supermarkets.
Oh.
Because I love to see what they have that I've never seen before. And I end up buying stuff that I, you know, will taste one thing and, you know, throw it away. But nonetheless, it's the uniqueness. The last time I was in Germany, I just went to this crazy store and spent a couple hours going up and down the aisles with a basket and just throwing stuff in because, you know, that's what you want to do. You want to learn the culture and the lives of these other folks. Okay, I'm going to throw a couple cities out. You tell me your thoughts. Did you go to the Taj Mahal?
I did go to the Taj Mahal.
And everybody says it's the most spectacular thing ever. Is it?
It was much smaller than I would have imagined.
I hear that, yep.
I mean, very beautiful, but I wasn't floored by it. For me, the most spectacular man-made structure is the, the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi. I think that is absolutely phenomenal.
Really?
Yeah, and I always recommend to people go around like 4 because you want to see it during the day, at sunset, and at night. Absolutely incredible.
So you mentioned Abu Dhabi. Dubai, tell me about that. I hear all sorts of interesting things about it.
I'm not a Dubai fan.
Why?
Because it's like Vegas meets Orlando on steroids.
Oh, 2 of the worst places I could think of.
Exactly. So I'm not a fan. Like, every time I have to go to Dubai, I'm like, I don't really do much of anything. Just not a fan. I prefer Abu Dhabi because in Abu Dhabi you have more of the Emirati culture. And because for me, I travel for culture, like, you know, the 7-star hotels and all that. It's not that interesting to me. Or the world's biggest Rolex store. Like, that's
who
not
cares?
that interesting. Yeah. So
Hotels are supposed to be pretty special there, though.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of them. Very nice places, but like I'm not. Yeah, I'm just not interested in that. So Dubai, I'm not a fan.
So, in doing research on you, it's fascinating. Listed as career, writer, photographer, entrepreneur, I always love that, travel expert, influencer, we can have a discussion about that all day long, public speaker. How would you describe yourself?
In terms of what?
Well, just, if somebody said, nice to meet you, what do you do for a living?
I'm always just like, I'm a liver and lover of life. I think, I've lived many different lives, at least 10. And I've never really cared about career. So when people say, what do you do? It's hard to put everything that I do in like a quick couple of words. So I'm just like, I just live my life and I enjoy it thoroughly.
Most interesting person you've met in your travels?
Oh my God. Oh my God, I've never been stumped in an interview. No,
I love doing that to people.
Very embarrassed.
No, well, think about it. You've met so many people.
I know.
If you could pick the top 3, who would it be?
God, I think a lot about my tour guide. So I'm thinking of Maha, who was my tour guide in Jordan. She was one of the first female tour guides in Jordan. And, just such a kind soul, but just very interesting stories, right? Because she is a pioneer in this space. And in Jordan, women weren't working that much when she started working. So I just learned so much from her, and I really consider her to be family. Who else? Oh my God, I'm like, there's so many people.
Well, there must be.
Zaki, who was my tour guide in Algeria. In Algiers, we had some really interesting conversations. And I'll never forget, because I was like, what do you want to do with your life? And he was like, what? Like, we don't have dreams here. We can't be wildly ambitious, especially if you're the oldest.
Really?
Yeah, and it's like that cultural oppression of like people can't dream and live out their dreams because of like familial responsibilities or whatever they feel are familial responsibilities. So I just remember the best part of Algiers was just he and I walking around and talking all day, and then running into protests and having to go the other way. And I'm trying to think who else. God, I don't know. That's hard. I'm going to actually sit down and think about that later.
Do you have travel heroes?
The only person that I think I probably truly respect in the travel space is Anthony Bourdain.
Because did you ever meet Anthony?
No.
Yeah,
which makes me really sad.
Yeah, I met him because I was connected with the Food Network, and interesting guy.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting guy. What is it that you admire about him?
I like the way he showed us the world. And,
he created something that didn't exist. He became a culinary journalist, which didn't, exist prior to him doing it. And I think in the process of showing the culture of food in each country, you learned about people and you learned about things that you would have no idea about. And so he was taking us on that journey, as you do, because the chances of me going to several of the places you just mentioned are slim and none. And so I admire the fact that you said, I'm going to get this done before I'm 35. And I think Anthony did that as well. But the way he articulated the experience was magical.
And I think, I would say it was beyond the culinary. That was just his entry point.
Yep.
But it was really, he was showing us the culture as a whole. And what I liked is that he never centered himself.
Ever. It was never about him.
It was never about him, and that's something that's rare, in particular in TV, but in particular in the travel space. It's rare that people like remove themselves and their ego, and it becomes about that place. And so, yeah, I loved the way that he traveled. I didn't feel like he was patronizing.
Ever. Never.
I've seen a lot of people in the travel space, both black, white, purple, and yellow, who are patronizing when they go to a lot of places. And I never really felt that with Anthony Bourdain. My one criticism of him was I didn't like when sometimes he traveled and he would be led by an expat.
Why did that bother you?
Because
they're not really from the country?
Yeah, no, they're not. And their experience is completely different. And so to me, if I'm going to see a country, because a lot of times when I was traveling, people used to reach out and say, hey, I'd love to meet you while you're in the country. But I'm like, no, like I want to spend my time in the country with locals. Like I'm not discounting the expat experience, but I think it's a very specific thing.
Yeah, it's a different thing.
Yeah, but I wanted to be with locals. Even when I lived abroad, I've lived in Japan, I've lived in London, Rome, Benin. Most of my friends were locals because I'm like, why do I just want a bunch of expat friends? That's not going to give me the experience of living in this foreign country. So that was my only criticism. But I think just an amazing, whatever. Everybody has flaws. But I think in terms of what he did in the travel space, he's the only one that I admire.
Yeah, and it's the uniqueness of what he did. I still take pitches from people who are trying to sell me shows, and the first thing I hear from somebody is, I'm the next Anthony Bourdain, and I always say, no, you're not. That just evolved. And to try and emulate what that man did, do your own thing and figure it out. To copy somebody. Do you have a favorite destination? No. Really? So if there's one place where I said you can only go back to one place and live there the rest of your life, you can't pick one?
No.
Wow, that's
absolutely
interesting.
not. I've been to 50 countries more than once. To put it in perspective, because people are always like, well, where would you go back to? I'm like, I've already been to 50 places more than once.
Yeah.
And I'm sure before all is said and done, I'll probably go back to like 150 places.
Tell me about the most extreme place you visited, be it the weather, be it the culture, be it the danger. What's the most extreme place?
Extreme, I think about distance.
Okay.
And distance from everywhere else and like difficulty to just get there. So for me,
I get that because I the farthest place I traveled was Sydney, Australia, and I felt like I was on the planet Xenon because it took forever to get there, and when you're there to try to communicate with people back here was a nightmare.
It was like 17 hours.
Yeah.
Oh no, from LA it's like 20 hours.
20 hours,
yeah.
right? And so that made me nuts. So you must have better stories than that.
Yeah, well, the South Pacific.
Oh.
The South Pacific is definitely
Middle of nowhere.
Legitimately the middle of nowhere. So I think of places like Nauru or Tuvalu where, there's not a flight every day that goes in and out of those countries. And, in Tuvalu, like it's 11 miles and you can do it quite quickly and quite easily.
How do you get there?
So through Fiji. So I took a flight through Fiji to get there. But very beautiful, like some incredible beaches that most people will never, ever, ever, ever see. Super poor. I can't imagine living there. I met this woman on the plane and she was from there and was like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm a tourist. She was like, what?
Really? Because they don't have tourists,
No,
I'm
they
assuming.
don't. No.
So where do you stay when you're there?
Oh my God. Oof. This little hotel next to the airport hotel. I don't even think you can call that whatever it was not great. But I was only there for 2 days.
But do you go to some places that are so disgusting where you kind of have to sleep with your eyes open?
No, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I mean, there, it wasn't disgusting. It was just like super basic. And there were a lot of bugs, like mosquitoes. So not like roaches or anything like that. And then the food, there wasn't, because it's like volcanic land. So there is not even really agriculture. So everything is packaged. I remember one day it was like toast or ramen. And it was just like, oh my God. Because, unfortunately in the South Pacific, a lot of people suffer from like obesity because they're getting a lot of their food imports from Australia, but it's all packaged food. And they're like, or they have islands that are just sand. So literally all they have are coconuts. You
Really?
know? Yeah, it's as far as like nutrition there and diet, it's in the whole South Pacific for the most part. It's pretty awful. Like,
so you get there, it's 11 miles, you say, and what do you do when you're there? I mean, you could do it all in an hour, I would imagine.
Yeah, like I just walked and the lady at the hotel or whatever you want to call it, the guest house we'll call it, she was like, just go, you won't get lost. I'm like, are you sure? She's like, just go, you'll be fine. Yeah, and I was just walking around and then I looked to my left, like through the bushes, and I saw like an amazing beach, like one of the most stunning beaches I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, this is just here. And that same woman I met on the plane, she drove me around later that day. And then the next day she gave me her boat and like sent a couple guys with me. And so we went island hopping, which was really amazing. But I was just like, oh my God, because we were going to islands where like, they're like, oh, one family lives on this island. What? Or, it was crazy because I'm like, how are these people surviving?
Well, that's it. I
here?
think about that when I'm driving, in the Midwest somewhere, and you go forever, and there's no, you'll see a house in the middle of nowhere. You say, what do those people do for a living? But you're on an island in the middle of nowhere where there's, and what do they do for a living? How do they survive?
Yeah, most of them don't work. I mean,
Really?
yeah, no. I mean, there's nothing to
And
do.
who owns the island?
I mean, the people. I mean, there's
Really?
government.
Wow.
They're independent nations.
That's crazy.
But Tuvalu, I remember you would drive around and people are just laying in hammocks, because it's very narrow. So everywhere you see the water on both sides. But yeah, people would just be in hammocks along the road or just on benches, and the tarmac, the runway or whatever was a community center. So people would be playing soccer and volleyball. Some people would sleep there at night because it was super hot and there's not really that much AC. So they would just sleep there to get a breeze, just on the runway.
And so from Fiji to this place takes how long?
I can't remember. Maybe 2-3 hours.
On a tiny plane, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course. No, but the craziest one was actually, where was I? Where was I? I was in Samoa. And I was going to Tunga. So from Samoa, we took a little hopper plane. I'm basically an Uber XL over to American Samoa. So then it was the future day.
Oh, yeah.
So then we stamped in and out, get back on our Uber XL,
and
then fly to
Tonga. Left, right?
Exactly. And then we went back in time.
You and Michael J. Fox.
Right. And so that was crazy. That little hopping around to get to Tonga was crazy.
What was Tonga like?
I love Tunga. So what's amazing is that you can swim with humpback whales.
Come on.
Which I didn't know. And I luckily went there during that time. And so I got to swim with humpback whales. And I was so scared. So I get in the water and I'm like, oh my God, this is frightening. And what if they breach and then they knock the boat over? But whales are super intelligent. And so they were playing with us. And it was this beautiful, that was one of the most amazing things I've ever done.
See, those experiences where you go and you go, I didn't know you could do that. Let's go.
Yeah.
And you seem to have nerves of steel. Is there anything that you have refused to do?
Yes.
Such as?
I will never jump out of a plane.
Oh, I'm with you on that.
That doesn't make sense.
No, smart
for me.
people don't do that.
Yeah. I'm never bungee jumping.
No, me either.
Doesn't make sense
No.
to me. Yeah, those, I don't need that adrenaline
That's just
rush
common
in that
sense.
way. Right, exactly. See,
Exactly.
I think it's common sense,
Yeah.
right? I'm not heli skiing. No, I'm not jumping out of a
No.
helicopter and skiing down a
No.
mountain. But I'll ski. I do ski, but yeah, I don't do extreme sports. I'm good.
When you and I are talking often about, is there a project we can do together? It always comes down somehow or another back to the substance of alcohol.
Yes.
And you are an expert on alcohol globally.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yes, thank you for bringing up one of my passions.
I love when you talk about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, there's very few things that connect us globally. No, I wouldn't say that. Actually, there's a lot that connects us. But one thing that connects us is alcohol. And for centuries, alcohol has existed in I would say not nearly, every single country in the world. Despite now, Iran, alcohol is illegal. Iran is the birthplace of beer.
What?
Yes, Iran is the birthplace of beer.
This is why I love talking to you.
And so, even Saudi, you can find alcohol in Saudi Arabia despite the fact that it's illegal. And so, I think about in Uganda we have mwenge, which is a fermented drink made from bananas. I think about going to see my friend in Brisbane, and his mom is from Hungary. And when I was there visiting, she was cutting peaches to make a fermented beverage. And she was putting it in the ground. And you can always find that. You have moonshine, here. Yep. I went to a little whiskey house, as they called it, in Ethiopia, where it's only men. And I begged them to let me in.
How'd you get in?
I just begged.
Really? And they said yes.
And they let me go in. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
It was cool. So I was the only woman in there. But there were just chairs around a room. And it was looking very shady. But so you have benches and men are just in there drinking. And there's a little bar, which is basically a little more than a raised bench. And they're pouring alcohol from very shady looking bottles. what's the stuff you put in your like windshield wiper fluid? You know that bottle?
Yes.
That's what they're pouring
Come
homemade
on.
alcohol from. And it's horrible. And, you know, I grew a whole chest of hair while I was there. It was horrible. But I brought some back home. I was living in D.C. at the time, so people would come over and I would give it to them when I was living in D.C. But yeah, I just find it so fascinating because in so many cultures, alcohol is part of traditional events that they're doing, like traditional ceremonies. Alcohol is healing in many ways. You have, I can't think of the name of it in the South Pacific. What is it called? I can't think of the name of it. It's a spirit in the South Pacific. They drink it in Fiji and Samoa and Tunga. Kava. So a lot of these spirits in different cultures have some healing properties. And I mean, I think at the base of it, it's all about community. Right? You go, like, I remember being in South Sudan in a village on the Nile, and women were making this, like, ginger wine situation and, like, a huge thing. And then the men are outside drinking it. And it's all about community around that. And, I think with binge drinking and shots and all of that, we've sort of perverted the idea of alcohol. And I think that's why it's difficult to sell a show like that, because we have this perversion around it and there's so much alcohol abuse. But I think when you look the world over, it's not like that. You don't find binge drinking and all.
And your knowledge of the history of this stuff is just fantastic. So we got to sell that show. The United States, do you travel here?
I do.
Tell me.
Yeah. I've been to 44 states. I love the U.S. because to me, the U.S. is like a bunch of little countries. Like, it's so culturally diverse.
Oh, yeah.
I recently was with, I shot a commercial in New Mexico with LEXUS, but it was produced by CNN. So really beautiful just to, like, meet a lot of Native women and hear their stories. It was incredible. We went to just incredible landscapes. Hours outside of Albuquerque, but really incredible. I did a shoot with them in Oklahoma the year before, and I got to learn about Black cowboys and the history of Black cowboys. But I think what else is interesting is, like, if you go to Minneapolis, that's like Somalia. If you go to D.C., it's like Eritrea and Ethiopia. You go to Houston, it's Nigeria. You go to Boston, it's Uganda. And you have all of these I mean, here you're in what is it? Sorry, Armenia,
Yes, in Los Angeles. We have all sorts of cultural areas that are indigenous people who came here and settled.
Yeah.
And it's like they brought their country here.
Literally.
Yeah.
And I think, so for me, that's what's so cool about the U.S., that people are always constantly, like, running outside trying to chase a passport stamp. But for me, 2020 was great because obviously recognizing all of the pain and suffering that some people had. But for me, like, I wanted to travel.
And you did.
And
I used to call you in the middle of COVID and you say, I can't talk, I'm getting on a plane. And I thought, are you insane? You traveled the entire time.
I did. Well, I sat down for 2 months. I didn't travel until mid-May.
Did you get COVID?
I only got COVID recently in December 2021.
Really?
At Art Basel in Miami, where we thought it was, 2019.
Yeah.
It was Omicron. I think actually that was the super spreader in the U.S. for Omicron, if I'm being quite frank, because there were a lot of Europeans that had come in as well.
But you traveled and you were healthy the whole time. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, because social distancing and masks work.
They do. Yeah, no question about it.
It's a very simple, straightforward concept. Masks work.
Yep.
Between March 2020 and let's just say March 2022, I took probably close to 150 flights.
Oh, my.
And I didn't get COVID on a plane. I didn't get COVID in a foreign country. I got COVID in Miami.
In Miami. So what 6 states have you not been to?
I have not been to Iowa, Kansas, North and South Dakota, Alaska, and Nebraska.
And they're on the agenda, I'm assuming, at some point?
They are.
Yeah.
I'd like LEXUS to let's get this done.
Oh yeah. So what's your connection with LEXUS? I didn't know about this.
Well, they reached out to me in 2020 because, like, I'd been to every country in the world, and they were looking for a store, and I was like, oh, I want to go to every state, and so we went to Oklahoma. So and in the pre-production, I was like, well, I want to go to Oklahoma. I gave them places I wanted to go, and I was like, in Oklahoma, I really want to learn about Black cowboys. Like, that would be super interesting. And so they made it happen, and it did really well. And then I was like, y'all want to do it again? And so then we went to New Mexico, and I was like, I really feel like we don't hear enough Native stories. And I'm like, so let's go to New Mexico and let's tell stories of Native people. And so we did that. And so I'm hoping that I can get them in for the last.
Yeah. And what's your deal with Four Seasons?
Four Seasons. So
You're always staying at the most beautiful places
Yeah,
where I have to pay a fortune, and I don't think you pay a nickel.
So we started working together when I was running my travel agency, because I was working with like high net worth clients, and so I would send them there. And then I remember it was, I think, my 32nd birthday or something. I reached out and they were like, "Oh yeah, come to the Serengeti," and they let me stay for free, and it was absolutely incredible. And then we just built a relationship. We built a relationship from there. And
was the Serengeti like in the middle of the desert with tents, or what was it?
Yeah, well, they had some tents. Actually, great experience. But as far as safari goes, the one thing I didn't like is like it's a hotel in the middle of the Serengeti.
Yeah.
I prefer luxury tented camps for my safari.
Well, don't we all?
So it was great, and it was definitely a 5-star experience. And they have the best infinity pool in the world because it's in front of a watering hole.
Oh.
But I prefer luxury tented camps to like a full structure of a hotel.
From 1986 to 1990, I lived in the Four Seasons in Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
Because we were shooting Double Dare, my show for Nickelodeon, and that was our deal. So, I mean, I would move in January and not leave till May, and then, come back. It was a crazy experience.
So the crazy thing, I wrote my book at the Four Seasons in Punta Mita.
Oh, did you
I was
really?
there for 6 weeks.
Oh, my God.
And then I went back for a week to work on my edit. So I'm like, that's basically my family.
Have you been to the Four Seasons in Budapest?
No.
Oh, that's a great one.
It's high on my... I was actually supposed to be going in 2020. I had a speaking engagement in June in Budapest, and I was staying there, but then...
When I went with my wife and my daughter went up to the exercise room, and a gentleman who, it was like out of the Eddie Murphy movie, claimed to be a prince from Africa and wanted to take my daughter out, and then said that he wanted to marry her and bring her to his country. And she said, "Dad, should I go out with him?" I said, "Well, go out with him. It should be interesting, know, but I don't think you want to move to his country and become,
Probably not, but that makes for a fun story.
Oh, see, that's exactly it, So let's talk about things that you know about because you experience this. Cameras on travel. Do you have a preference?
So I was a Canon person for a long time, and I loved when they got the mirrorless. And then at my party, before I went to Seychelles, which was my last country, I had a party in New York, and somebody stole my camera.
Oh,
Broke my heart because I lost all my images from Bhutan, Pakistan, Venezuela.
You didn't download the stuff. Oh, my.
Because it was like such a, quick back-to-back. So then I got the Sony mirrorless. That's been good. I haven't been shooting that much lately.
Really?
So like post-pandemic, I've really enjoyed just going on vacation and not really taking pictures of anything at all.
My last vacation, I used my iPad a lot, believe it or not. But I bought this Luminex camera that has an amazing lens where I can shoot somebody's tonsils from 100 miles away, but also get, good things close up. I'm getting ready to go to Italy, and I took like 5 cameras out of the closet the other day trying to figure out what's the best thing to travel with now. Because I also don't want to spend my whole time taking pictures. You want to love the moment that you're in as opposed to, this is where I went. But did you have any fun there is the question,
That's what's interesting, because people always think they're seeing the best parts of my life. And I'm like, oh, no. You'll never see the best parts of my life because I never take a picture.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
So all the best things that, like, I just had a very small dinner for my birthday on Sunday, and we're like, oh, we didn't take any group picture. Like, there's no one picture.
That's okay.
But it was an amazing time, and I'm going to remember it. And, so for me, I'm not that preoccupied with taking images anymore.
I've never understood taking pictures of food. That one has always driven me insane.
I feel like that's a new thing.
Oh,
and I do that with my phone. I'm like, okay, this is what the kids are doing.
Do you collect things when you travel?
Yes.
Tell me.
Spirits, alcohol.
Oh, you do?
Mm-hmm.
And is it difficult to bring it back into the country?
Mm-mm.
No, not at all.
No.
Okay.
I just put it in a suitcase.
And you never have any problems when you're coming and you just have to claim it and that's it, huh?
No.
I didn't know
Are
that.
you supposed to claim it?
I thought you should.
No, I don't. I think only if it's duty free. I mean,
yeah.
My friend Yankwe actually recently, last year bought me the best gift ever. I'm just a hard person to buy gifts for, because I don't want for much. My friend bought me a wine suitcase, which is phenomenal. It holds 12 bottles.
Oh my.
And it's super padded. So like I went to Napa and filled it right on up. And I can't wait to go
Well,
back
that
to
was
South
easy.
Africa. Yeah. It's amazing because, usually when I'm bringing spirits, I'm like wrapping them in my clothes and praying.
With
but
towels and dirty laundry. I've done that. Yep.
But this is specifically for wine, so it's great. I took it to Italy, actually, and brought back 12 bottles of Italian wine.
Interesting. Any place that you've missed on your travels that you want to go back and see, spend more time?
So many places.
Really?
Yeah.
Hard to pin it down to one.
Yeah, I want to see more of India. I want to go to Goa, Varanasi. Where do I've never been to Bora Bora.
Ah.
I'm leaving that because I'm like, hopefully one day a man will want to take me. So I wanted to leave something because obviously I had to go to the Maldives. I had to go to the Seychelles. But because Bora Bora is part of French Polynesia, it's France. So I
Right.
didn't need to go there.
Right.
So I've left it there. So if anyone is listening and wants to take me to Bora Bora, I'm ready. We can talk to the Four Seasons about it.
A lot of times on this show, we always come down to overcoming obstacles. How do people do that? And some people are better at it than others. And the reason we have people like you on the show is you've managed to overcome a certain amount of obstacles in your life, I'm assuming. And so I'm asking you, what were those obstacles that you had to overcome?
That's interesting. I think, it's just being resilient. I don't know. It's because, like, actually today marks the 19th day since my dad died. 19th year. 19th year since my dad was killed. And he died 2 days after my 19th birthday.
Oh, my.
So now I've lived 19 years with him and 19 years without him as of today. So, at 19, I was just 19. So that was something that I definitely had to get through. It was like it was a week after my freshman year of college. My mother, when it happened, was in Uganda. I had to call her. She was in Uganda because her mom had had a stroke. So I called her. She was in the hospital room. She flew back. Then when she was back, she found out her mom died. So that was a really tough time. And I'm the baby. So that was tough. So getting through that. And then I think, just like mental health, like getting past depression. People would always look at me and they're like, oh, well, you're successful. You have these degrees and this job experience. But I was never really happy until I found my freedom. And I was like, oh, look, I have everything inside of me to do anything that I want. And so I chose to just keep on trying to figure it out and do what I want. And, I quit things a lot in a quest to figure out what it is that I want to do. And so for me, it's just the resilience of like getting past life. The thing about being Black, again, for me, it's like visibly African. Like, yeah, I would, enter or exit countries and they really think like I'm on like fake passports, fake documents, whatever. And Pakistan, I will say, was the worst travel experience I've ever had. I was leaving Pakistan. It was like a 2 a.m. flight. And I was going like to Qatar and then straight to New York. And, you get to the airport in a lot of places. Before you check in, you go through security. Whatever. They scan your bags. So they scan my bags and they pull me to the side and they're like, we have to go through your bags. I'm like, okay, whatever. No big deal. I'm like on my phone. They're like going through it, but really going through it. I'm like, oh, do you need some help? Like, are you looking for something specific? Let me help you move this along. They're like, no. So they're going through. Another officer comes, takes my passport. I'm using my American passport. Do you have another passport? I'm like, no. Did I lie? Yes. But it was irrelevant. And they're like, well, because I flew into Islamabad, but I was flying out of Lahore. And they're like, well, why aren't you flying out of Islamabad? I'm like, well, why would I go backwards? Like, I'm going to New York. And they were asking me all types of wild questions. And I'm just like, what? And then they took me to an x-ray, not a metal detector, a medical x-ray. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm solo. And I'm like, what are you doing? And the guy told me, sometimes people keep drugs in their stomach. And I was like, oh, okay.
So they're going to take an x-ray of your stomach?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And did they do that?
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't protest?
Mm-mm. No.
Oh, my
I mean, it's
God.
like, it's 2:00 in the morning. I'm in Pakistan. Like, I'm by myself. So then I saw these guys who I'd seen at an event. We hadn't met, but one was Pakistani American and one was a black guy who was his friend. So we saw each other, and I like recognized that we had seen each other. And the black guy was being a little bit harassed, not as bad as me. So then whatever, I get through. They believe that my American passport is real. And I go to check in. They're super rude to me. And then I go to security. So in Muslim countries, women and men separate for security. And then women are put in a little room and they do the security. This woman like groped my vagina in a way I've never had done to me. Then made me spread my legs and did it again. And so at this point, I'm like in tears.
I can't even.
And I'm alone. And I'm just like, this is horrible. And so then those guys saw me later. I was like in tears, and they were like, okay, come sit with us. And they like got me some food and whatever. And thank God they were there, because I feel like if they were strangers, but it was still like some comfort. Because if there was nothing, I was a mess.
What a story.
Yeah, I'd never dealt with anything like that. And here's what I will say about, we were talking about governments. The government and the people exist on two separate planes. I had an amazing time in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't interact with a ton of women, mostly men. The men were incredibly kind, respectful, everything. I had a great time both in Islamabad and Lahore. So the experience at the airport was horrific. The worst thing that's ever happened to me when I travel. But I can separate that from the experience I had. I would absolutely go back to Pakistan.
You would, even after that experience. And so is the assumption, and I think it is from my point of view, once again, I've never been a black woman, but they were picking on you because you were a black woman. African. Because
I'm African.
Really?
Yeah. It's not just black, no.
It's African.
It's African. Mm-hmm. I'm unmistakably African.
What
no
a
one
world.
looks at me and is like, oh, maybe she's... No. It's like, that's an African.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always having to deal with that when you go into a country such as this. I'm assuming concerned that kind of thing could happen on an ongoing basis, and yet you say you still want to go back to that country.
I would definitely go back to Pakistan.
Mind-boggling to me. My goodness.
Venezuela harassed me, and I was like, excuse me, Venezuela.
Wow.
No one's trying to stay here, because it was crazy, because, I mean, they were difficult. I struggled to get in. I was using my Ugandan passport, because Americans obviously couldn't go to Venezuela.
No.
And, like, getting in was annoying, but not that bad. Getting out was harder. And I'm just like, I am leaving. And I was going to Paris, and I was using my American passport. And I'm just like, guys, I'm leaving. What do you want from me? I've already been stamped in your country. Stamp me out so I can go about my business. Like, Venezuela, no shade. I thought Venezuela was incredible, and I loved visiting Los Roques, these gorgeous islands that belong to Venezuela.
So when you talk to them like that, do they get upset, or do they
Sometimes people get upset.
Do they?
In the Philippines, the immigration officer was like, I can deport you. I said, because you're racist? Is that why you're going to deport me? And I mean, granted, like I recognize there's some power that I have because I am an American citizen, and I'm like, oh, I pray my government comes to get me when I'm in some prison. But I'm like, I do it so they don't do it to other people, because I have just a strong personality, and I'm incredibly resilient, and I do it so they don't treat other people like that. Like, when I went to the Philippines, I was particularly mad because other people with American passports were being stamped in super, super quick. And I'm like, I too am an American, but I wasn't receiving that same courtesy. Same with Algeria. I stand up for myself. I'm not just like, okay, I'm going to respect you because you're an authority.
Listen.
I'm like, this is racist and you're crazy and I don't have to deal with this. And so if you want to fight, we're going to fight.
I had an experience after the whole 9/11 thing where you had to have your passport match your ticket. Well, my real name is Mark Berkowitz, but I'm always booked as Marc Summers, okay? So I'm on this French island in the Caribbean. I can't remember exactly where I was. And my ticket said Marc Summers, but my passport said Mark Berkowitz. They didn't speak English. I didn't speak French, but they weren't going to let me get on the plane. And I started to get argumentative, and a guy put his hand on his gun, okay? And I thought, okay, this is not good. So I went over in the corner, and I thought, how am I going to fix this? So I went to the airline. It was A-Lot Airlines or something like that. It was a strange airline. Mm-hmm. And I tried to explain to them. They wouldn't let me change the ticket to say my real name. And now I'm sitting there, and I'm going, how the hell am I going to get on this plane and get back to the States? And this is what I came up with, and it worked. So I said, you guys are French, right? Oui, oui. And I said, Jerry Lewis? Oh, Jerry Lewis. I knew the French loved Jerry Lewis. And I said, Jerry Lewis's real name is Joseph Levitch. Joseph Levitch, Jerry Lewis. Marc Summers, Mark Berkowitz. And they went, oh, go ahead. And that's how I got onto the plane. But after that, I certainly have made sure that my passport and my ticket, stay the same. Because when people book me now, I say, Summers is my TV name, but Berkowitz. And that was when it just happened, and I thought I'm going to be stuck on this island for the rest of my life. So that's minor compared to the stories you've told me. But my God,
I've Googled myself. I think I was in Equatorial Guinea, and I was trying to go to Guinea, and they were like, "Oh, you have to have a visa," and I was like, "No, I don't." It was a whole thing, and they were like really trying not to let me on the plane. And I Googled myself, and I was like, "Look." Stop.
That's brilliant.
I'm getting on this plane.
That's fantastic.
Let's just get this
do this.
done.
Oh
yeah,
my
I
God.
did that at the Afghan embassy in where were we? In Kazakhstan as well, because they didn't want to give me a visa, and I was just begging. I was just there begging for a visa, and I Googled myself, and I had a couple. There were some articles from like the region, and I was able to convince them to give me a visa.
Yeah, that's what I love about you. You stand up. Okay, so you've got this book. It's called the Catch Me If You Can book, and it's how many pages? This thing weighs
416.
Oh my God! How long did it take you to put this thing together?
Oh my God, that was like I still have PTSD from writing this book. So I wrote 80% of it in that 6 weeks.
Did you really?
Yeah, my original manuscript was 160,000 words. Nat Geo only asked for 80,000, so they actually extended the book by like 52 pages or something.
Well, the pictures are amazing, and the
over
stories
300 images
are ridiculous because you've lived this crazy life and continue to live this crazy life. And I'm looking at so what is this country?
Eswatini.
Tell me about that.
Formerly known as Swaziland.
Ah, that I've heard of.
So they changed their name recently to get rid of their colonial name.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, so completely surrounded by South Africa.
Is your mom still around?
Mm-hmm.
What does she think of what you've accomplished?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think while I was in it, she was just like, "What are you doing?" But when I made it to CNN, and she was like, "Oh, this is kind of a big deal." And
now with the book, what does she think?
Well, now she's super proud, and like she talks about me in her like church groups, and she's making everybody buy the book, and like for her book club, obviously they're gonna read the book, and so now, she's super proud now, and it's interesting because like she was. A couple months ago, we were at my house in Detroit, and she was looking at me. She was like, "What did you want to be when you were growing up?" And I said, "Oh, let me look." So there's this book, a Dr. Seuss book called My Book About Me that she bought me. I had a lot of books. Shout out to Scholastic Book Club.
I remember that.
Right? And in the book, it's like, what do you want to be? And I wrote, I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a teacher. And I think I wanted to be a doctor. And so I'm like, I'm an artist and I'm a teacher in many ways.
2 out of 3 ain't bad,
Right?
That's what I'd say.
So yeah, I think now she's just kind of, she sees me differently and she kind of marvels at me, which I think is weird because
I do too.
I'm like, I'm just your kid though.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have 2 older sisters.
And what do they do?
So one sister is an insurance agent. My other sister is a VP at a bank.
In Detroit?
One lives in the suburbs of Detroit and one lives in the suburbs of Orlando.
And what do they think about what you're doing?
Yeah, I think too, I think for them it's crazy because their friends are always like, oh my God, I read about your sister in this thing and that thing. And I think for me with my sister in Detroit, it's her kids. She has 2 sons. And they just think it's so cool. And they know. So they're 7 and 9. Or 8 and 10. Eek.
Close enough.
And one of them, the younger one, was like, oh, yeah, hello, first Black woman to visit every country in the world. And I was like, how do you even know that? It's crazy because, they have comprehension now. Because when I was doing a lot of it, they didn't comprehend and I wasn't really around. And every time
babies.
They were babies. And every time they saw a plane, my one nephew would say, Auntie, when he saw a plane.
Thinking you were up there doing that? My goodness. So the trip you're taking, when are you leaving?
Tomorrow morning.
And where are you going?
Senegal.
And what are you going to do there? Just have fun?
Just hang out. So in Dakar, they have Dakar, which is their biannual art festival, so the Biennale. And so just going to hang out with friends, see some art, party a bit. Kehinde Wiley has an amazing home there, and it's a artist residency program. So I hear he's having a party on Thursday.
And you'll probably be there.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, yeah, Dakar is one of my happy places. Like, I want to get property there. I go there at least once a year, usually twice a year. I have a huge friend group there, very close friends, and I love it. It's super chill. It's very African, and it's a bit hectic, but there's a calmness there that you don't find in, like, a Lagos or, like, a Kampala. So I love it. And it's super close. I mean, not from LA, but from New York, it's only like a 7-hour flight, which is great.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah.
I'm going to Taormina soon. Have you been to Sicily?
I have been to Sicily.
Tell me about it.
It's gorgeous. So I was living in Italy. I was living in Rome at the time. Didn't know what Sicily was going to be like. My friend Katie and I, we rented a car and just drove around.
I heard it's totally different than
It's a different country.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
The language is different. The food is different.
A lot of seafood, right?
A lot of seafood.
I love that.
And great wine. Really.
It always comes back to alcohol.
Yes. Go to the winery. Donna Fungata is an amazing winery down there in Western Sicily. Sicily. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. This has been, we've gone longer than an hour. We've gone 70 minutes here. I could sit here and talk to you all day, but I know you have things to do and places to go. Delightful to meet you finally and in person. Good luck with the book. It's called The Catch Me If You Can by Jessica Nabongo. Please pick it up. If you can't go to any of these places, you'll be educated and informed and entertained by this book, and I hope you all pick it up. Can't thank you enough for being here. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Marc Summers Unwraps is a production of Believe Limited, created by me, Marc Summers, and Jessica Richmond. Produced by Keith Corneluk and Jessica Richmond. Executive produced by Patrick James Lynch and Ryan Geelan. Post-production support from Joshua Sterling Bragg and Believe Limited. Don't forget to subscribe or follow the show on your favorite podcast player, and if you really love it, why don't you leave us a rating and a review? Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Marc Summers Unwraps.